Okay, I use this same write-up for all my classes, whether it's an advanced organic class, biochem, Chem A, 1A, whatever. It's the same one. Most of the departments, if not all of them I've ever worked in, have a very similar write-up. Now, the write-up is in 3 parts. There's a pre-lab, a data collection, and then a post-lab. And to get your 10 points, remember, labs are easy points. You want to make sure you have all 3 of those done on time. And I give you a week per lab. So your dry lab today is going to be due next week. Sometimes they give you a little more time. Yeah. I thought I updated them. Oh, I'll update them as I go. Is dry lab 1 outdated? See, the way you create a class in Canvas is you import an old class and then it brings over the old dates as well. Go to assignments. What? Do you have lab today? Okay. Let's just do this in lab. All right. So, okay, when you're setting up your lab, it depends on, now this is for wet lab only. Now this is to be done in your lab notebook. Okay, it's one of those comp books. They're very inexpensive. You can get them everywhere. You can also get one that's leather bound for about $90. I actually had a student buy one of those. I couldn't believe it. It's this gorgeous thing. It was like a graduate student. When you're in grad school, the school owns your data, not you. So you have to do it in an official lab notebook that they provide, which is leather bound. And I went to Davis, and that's the way they did it there. But in lower division stuff, you have to provide your own. And you're more than welcome to buy the $90 leather bound one, but I would highly recommend you don't. Yeah. Sometimes lab notebooks have grid paper in them rather than just lines. The grids are nice when you want to do a graph because the graph paper is already built in. And we're not doing very many graphs. In fact, I'm not doing any graphs. So just a plain old comp book. And could I have that for a second? Okay. Spiral bound will not work. It has to be sewn permanent pages. So this would not work, okay? Unfortunately, yes. Like this, for example. Most of the time it comes in black and the pages are sewn in. You are not to rip out any pages, period, no exceptions. Leave the first page for your table of contents and then number the rest of the pages. We're only using one side. We're not writing on both sides of the paper. Sometimes when you write on both sides of the paper, you get bleed through, and depending on what pen you're using. So we have plenty of room in there. Okay, so one side only, number the pages, leave first page for table of contents. Now, some of you like electronic devices. That's fine. You can use, a tablet, that's fine. But you cannot type in your tablet. You have to handwrite it. Now, everything's going to be handwritten in your lab notebook in indelible ink. And I'll show you what to do if you make a mistake. Okay. Every wet lab will have the following stuff. Okay. Purpose. Oh, I should say, let me back up. Title. Which lab are we doing today? Okay, and the purpose of the lab. Now, all the labs in here will have a background, and most of the labs in 1A, 2A, and 3A at this school has a background piece. You're not to write, well, I shouldn't say that. It's optional to include the background if you want, but I'm not looking for that when I look at your pre-lab. So the pre-lab is going to have, remember I said there are 3 parts: pre-lab, doing the actual lab with the data, and then the post-lab. The pre-lab has to be done before you start the lab. That's the point of the part of pre-lab. And there's done for 2 reasons: one for safety, and also for your organization, so you'll get done on time. Some labs are longer than others. If you don't do the pre-lab, you're totally unorganized. And I've subbed for other teachers. And I walk into their labs, and the students don't even know what lab they're doing until they walk into the lab. And they're totally unorganized. And it's just like, oh my God. The whole department does pre-labs. So no matter what class you take after this, including physics, including engineering classes, everyone does pre-labs. So, so for me, for my classes, title, purpose, and the purpose you can get from the background. Doesn't have to be, 2 pages long. It's like a paragraph, a little paragraph. Structures. Now, if you're taking an organic class, you're gonna have to write all the structures down. And depends on what your teacher wants. You should write down structures. Now, in here, we're not going to have to worry about structures because we're not doing any organic compounds except for the very last lab for vitamin C. That's the only one you have structures on. All the rest, you don't have to worry about structures. Now, along with that is going to be a materials list. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, this goes in your lab notebook. So when I say lab notebook, I mean whatever you buy for your lab notebook, whether it's a tablet or a comp book or whatever. Okay. All right. In this class and in 1A, 2A, and 3A, we have very safe labs. But you still have to do the first aid on the chemicals we run into. Now, your first wet lab, you're going to have water and some little stuff to measure. So there's no first aid involved there. But from then on, you have to do the first aid. Where do you get the first aid from? You get it from something called an SDS. And the old one is called was called MSDS. Okay, SDS stands for Safety Data Sheet. Excuse me. And you get that online. So let me okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to go to Google. You're going to do a search. You start off with SDS space the name of the chemical. So let's do hydrochloric acid. Now see here they have the old MSDS. It's the same document. Every chemical seller in the Western, I shouldn't say Western, in the civilized world, puts these out. In the United States and East and Western Europe, they're required to. Most other countries have agreed to it, and it's in the same format. There's about 20 sections to the SDS, and we're going to be looking at the first aid section. So let's look at the Fisher one. Fisher is a really good, solid company, sells a lot to schools. There's a number of these. Okay, it's always a PDF file. And it's always section 4. And this is what you'd write down for hydrochloric acid. Eye contact, skin contact, etc. Now, I don't believe in busy work. So if you can summarize this, do it. Also, what if we have 3 labs that use hydrochloric acid? Don't write it 3 times. Write it once and then say, the second time, say C lab, whatever. And then the third time, say C lab, whatever. Okay. I want you to be exposed to the first aid and any chemical we come in contact with for your own safety. Now, if you work at a store or company or whatever, and any chemicals that are involved at all has to have a station set up, usually in the break room or something like that, where they have these SDS documents available. If they don't have it, they'll get fined big time. And if you get hurt without being exposed to the SDS documents for first aid, you have a nice lawsuit. So it's a big deal. There's all kinds of other stuff available in the SDS. There's how to store it, chemical characteristics, toxicology. If you go down to section 11 and 12, it tells you toxicology, teratogenicity. Who knows what teratogenicity means? Okay, that causes birth defects. It'll tell you here whether it causes birth defects or not. Mutagenic effects, that's whether it causes a mutation in your DNA. Here's teratogenicity here. Carcinogenicity, does it cause cancer or not? So the document has a lot of information. Now, if you are pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or breastfeeding, one of those 3, you should go to section 11 and check this out. And stay away from this chemical if there's any of these things that would affect your newborn. Okay, if you're not any of those 3 categories, it really doesn't matter. That's pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or breastfeeding. Okay, and if you're not breastfeeding, you don't have to worry about this either. Okay, all right, so that's how to find the first aid. Now, we're not going to have any issues with first aid on the first couple of labs. After that, I'll tell you, make sure you have your first aid in there, just remind you. But that's how to find it out. In the lab, in the back, there are these documents as well already. So if you want to look, you just page through that. You're more than welcome to do that. It's easiest to just go online and look it up. It's much cleaner. These are really dusty. They haven't been, no one ever uses them. They always use the ones online. Okay, does that make sense how to find the first aid? Okay. Now, doing a search on SDS space hydrochloric acid, I'm going to get a lot of documents that aren't SDSs. It's the way of the Google search. I'll have hydrochloric acid documents. It has to be an SDS. So if it's not an SDS, go to the next one. Because you'll find a whole bunch of SDSs. Okay. You need materials and setup. The easiest way to deal with setup is just draw a little quickie picture. Materials, just a list of things you're going to be needing. Test tube rack, deionized water, whatever the stuff is you need in there. Materials list can come before or after the procedure, doesn't matter. And the procedure is just that, just like a recipe in a cookbook. How do you do the thing? Step number 1. And this says obtain an unknown from the stockroom. Number 4, test tubes. Put 5 drops of distilled water in each. Okay, just step. And you can summarize these as well. Now, also, you can do this as a group, at least with your partner. You still have to do it separately, but you can kind of say, oh, you do this part, I'll do this part, that's fine. And then you share the data afterwards. So as soon as you team up, share your contact information with your partner. Okay, then you're gonna need a data table. Sometimes the data tables are supplied, sometimes they're not. And the purpose of a data table is just to tell you where to put stuff. We know to go to the data table to find out the information you've gathered from doing the procedure. That's not required for the pre-lab. You have to do one anyway, so you might as well just do it as part of the pre-lab. You can either cut that out from your lab notebook or your lab packet, or you can just draw it in by hand. Either way is fine. If you do cut it out and put it in your lab notebook, do not staple it in. Use only glue stick or tape. Okay, sometimes there are calculations built into the data table. So just keep that in mind from the procedure, whether you need to include that or not. And the data table can be changed as you go through the lab. It's not required to have one and just use it by itself. Okay, so that's the data, or that's the pre-lab. So you're gonna have title, so that's what a typical one looks like. Okay, handwritten. Notice it's got two signatures on it. The signature on the right says you've done the pre-lab. The signature on the left means you cleaned up before you go. Now, the first wet lab is very easy to clean because we're just using water. But some of the other ones, we use salt, table salt, and because we have a black countertop, when the salty water dries, it becomes a white ring. So it's important to, not so much the first one, but the second one on, just take a damp paper towel, not wet, but damp, and just quickly wipe down your area. And then ask me to give you your signature, or my signature. And then the score, I'm going to be scoring these electronically online. So when you submit your scanned PDF file of your lab, I can look at it electronically in my end. So I'm going to be looking for things like, was your pre-lab done? Is your data table filled out? Are your post-lab questions done? Are your pre-lab questions done? Sometimes there are questions in the pre-lab write-up you have to fill out. And all those do is to get you into the procedure to kind of understand what's going on before you enter the lab. So this person also needs to be done in indelible ink, non-erasable ink. Now, you don't have to put your name on it because when you click on assignments in Canvas, it's your Canvas, so you don't have to put your name on it. Sometimes other people make you put their name on it and your lab partner and all that stuff. I don't care about that, okay? If you and your lab partner get together and share your data, that's fine. Again, I see there's a little bleed through here. So if you buy an inexpensive comp book, like you get it at Walmart, it's very, very thin paper and it tends to bleed through. Your $90 leather-bound lab notebook doesn't have thin paper. Okay, so again, two signatures at the top, title, purpose, procedure. They're missing materials on this. Okay, so whenever you're doing data, make sure you have a unit associated with it. There are very few numbers in chemistry that don't have a unit. Like pH doesn't have a unit. There's a couple others, not very many though. Most have units. So you can either put the units at the top, like temperature, degrees C, or you can put a degree C for each one of them. It doesn't matter to me. Now depends who you get. The old way of doing lab write-ups is all white space has to have crosses in it. So the whole page has got something ink on it. There's the number, there's the procedure, and any white space has got covered. I don't know of anyone who does that anymore, but you may run into one who requires you to do that. Like right here, they'd have to put lines here just to take up space, which to me is total busy work. Total. You have enough going on in your life, you don't need to be doing that. Now, if you make a mistake, since this is indelible ink, you can't erase it. You cannot use whiteout either. You're going to put one line through it because I need to be able to read your error. One line through it and then put a correction either over it or to the side. No scribbles, no whiteout. Another data table. Here's a typical materials list. Data table with units on it. Now, remember, milliliters is small m, big L. So liters is big L. Milli, lowercase m. Sometimes there are pre-lab questions, sometimes there aren't. So if there are, just fill them out. Usually they're pretty simple. Sometimes there's 3, 4 questions, not a big deal. And on answering the questions, you do not have to write down the question, just the answer is fine. Now you always have post-lab calculations and questions. So this is just a pre-lab. Then you're going to do the lab. Do the post-lab questions and write a conclusion. Now, the conclusion part frequently is a problem with students because the lab write-up in your lab packet will not say write a conclusion. All labs need conclusions, no exceptions, except for dry labs. Now, again, only applies to wet labs. And then this will be due in a week. Now, pre-labs are not a big deal once you've done a couple of them. The first wet lab you have, you get to correct everything you miss. So if you come in and forget to do the pre-lab on the first, which is lab 3, I won't send you home because you need a pre-lab. After that, you need to have the pre-lab done before you can do the lab. So the first wet lab, if you forgot to do a conclusion, you can do a conclusion after the fact. If you didn't do whatever, you can fix it because you have never done a wet lab with me before. Okay, remember, lab points are easy points. There's a fair amount of work, but they're not hard. And a point is a point. Test point, lab point, they are the same points. So don't waste the easy points. Now, every class you take is going to be different in terms of how they grade your labs. Sometimes they just assign 100 points per lab, and then they have 15% of that is your lab grade. I do it differently. I just pre-do all that for you. Labs are 10 points apiece. Okay, so any questions about the pre-lab? And your first wet lab is a ways away. I want to give you plenty of time to get your stuff. Now, the way we're going to do this now, when you finish the lab, you've done your post-lab questions, you've done your conclusion, you're going to scan that into one PDF file and go to assignments, click on lab 3, and it'll prompt you for a file name. That's the PDF file you created. You're turning in all labs that way, except for the last 2 labs. Those are combined into one lab. Other than that, each lab is going to be its own PDF file. I don't care the name you use, because when you click on the assignment, it'll keep it separate. So you can use the same name on every lab you want. Okay? Any questions about the write-up? Yeah. Yes. You'll also have access to the video. You can just turn it back and forth. Okay. All right, that's what I wanted to cover today. So we're going to start lab a little early. I need to render those 2 videos. So I'll be over there shortly. Now, anyone from Friday lab that wants to stay for Saturday lab, you're more than welcome to do that. Check it for dry labs. Just want to verify what you've done at home. That's fine. Okay. All right. Come on over.